Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Rick Borman. Dean Millheiser has asked me to do the Q&A for you. I want to start, though, and tell you that that was so riveting and so meaningful to every one of us that we were prompted to run out quickly and pick up a small gift for you. And one of our students here, one of our...
Is it a wheelbarrow?
It might as well be. Brett Branham, who is a 3L. You are the head of the Bar Association for the school, is going to come up and present you with a gift, and then we'll get on with the Q&A. Thanks, Brett.
You thought we brought the wheelbarrow, but I was looking for it. I thought you brought it with you. On behalf of the students and also the faculty, the administration, we'd just like to thank you for being here, for supporting the law school, but more importantly, for supporting the freedoms that we've all come to enjoy. So on behalf of the law school, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Brett.
And thank you for your representation.
Thank you very much.
I can't confirm or deny that I put my business card into that bag. But this is a tie on behalf of the law school, so now you can take us with you wherever you go.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Well, we do have stools here. I suppose we should try to use them. I'm going to go off script here a little bit, but that's for those of you who know me, you know that I do that from time to time. I was in my research, reading up on you. I saw a GQ article, which I was surprised to find. I thought they were pretty fair-handed with that. But there was a reference to the boots you're wearing today. And could you give us a little bit of the background on where they've been and what they've seen?
Well, Rick, I'm happy to. These boots, these are black ostrich Lucchese's. And I've had them for many years. And when I was Solicitor General of Texas, they became my argument boots. And I wore them for every argument I did as SG. Litigators tend to be relatively superstitious, and so I wore the same boots, and they brought me good luck, except, I am sorry to say, in one venue, and that was the Supreme Court of the United States. And as the dean mentioned, when I came out of law school, I had the wonderful privilege of clerking for Chief Justice William Rehnquist, who was just an incredible man. I mean, he was brilliant. He was a dear friend and mentor. But the chief was very much a stickler for attire. I mean, he was old school. And more than once, the chief had reprimanded counsel for inappropriate attire at oral argument. And so the first argument I did at the court was actually happened to be the first Monday in October 2003. So I was 32 years old, and as I thought about the first argument, I thought, I really don't want to begin this argument with the Chief Justice leaning over and saying, "Oh, counsel, that footwear is not appropriate in this courtroom." So I am embarrassed to say I went to my closet, to the back of my closet. I pulled out an old pair of wingtips. I dusted them off. I put them on. I'm sorry to tell you I didn't have the courage of my convictions. And so the first several arguments I did at the court, I wore the wingtips. Well, then a few years later, the Chief Justice passed away. And John Roberts became the new Chief Justice. John Roberts, like I, both of us clerked for Chief Justice Rehnquist. Both of us were pallbearers at the funeral. And shortly thereafter, I saw the new Chief Justice, and I guess I was feeling a little cheeky. Because I asked him, I said, "Mr. Chief Justice, tell me, do you have views on the appropriateness of boots as footwear at oral argument?" And Chief Justice Roberts laughed, and he said, "Ted, if you're representing the state of Texas, they are not only appropriate, they are required."
True stories are always the best, aren't they? Senator Cruz, you're sounding very presidential tonight. And if you were to run for president in 2016, how would you unite the Republican Party that seems to be intent on eating its own? And as you've said in the past, America is a middle-right country. How do you overcome the media and even the graybeards of your own party that continue to paint you as a wacko bird and extremist?
Well, Rick, there's a lot to that question. But let me address it this way. Let me talk about how we unify, not just Republicans, how we unify the country. I think where we are right now, I think the challenges facing this country are extraordinary. I don't think this is an ordinary time in politics. There is an urgency. The most frequent thing I hear as I travel the country is men and women, they come up to me, they put their hands on my shoulders, they look me in the eyes. They say, Ted, I'm scared. I'm scared for this country. I'm scared for my kids and grandkids. We're bankrupting this country. We're losing our freedoms. That urgency, and I think the window to turn this country around is narrow. I think it is not a matter of decades, it's a matter of a few years. There comes a point where the hole is too deep, where you can't get out. I don't think we've reached that point anymore, but we are at the precipice. In my view, the way to turn things around comes from the people. I'm profoundly optimistic. Now, I'm not optimistic about Washington. Washington is hopeless. But, and listen, you talked about divisions in the Republican Party. Divisions in the Republican Party are not new. They've existed from the dawn of time, from when Lincoln first ran as the first Republican, to in more recent years the divisions between Goldwater Republicans and Rockefeller Republicans, to 1976 when Ronald Reagan primaried a sitting Republican president, Gerald Ford. These divisions are nothing new. Now, the media loves divisions among Republicans. They love to feature them. They love to fan the flames. In my view, the way we unify the country, we can draw inspiration from the past. The book of Ecclesiastes tells us there's nothing new under the sun. I think where we are today is eerily, is uncannily like the late 1970s. Late 1970s, you had Jimmy Carter in the White House. I agree. You had the same failed economic policies. You had out-of-control spending. You had out-of-control taxes and regulation that were producing the same misery, the same stagnation. And you had the same feckless foreign policy that was making the world a more dangerous place. And what we saw across the country was a grassroots movement, millions of men and women that came together and became the Reagan Revolution. Now, that didn't come from Washington. Washington despised Ronald Reagan. It came from the American people, and what happened was that grassroots movement swept up and transformed this country. The reason I'm optimistic is the same thing I'm convinced is happening right now. As I travel this country, everywhere I go, that same energy, that same passion, men and women who have never been involved in politics, who say, "Dear Lord, what is happening to our great nation?" And as a word of encouragement, I mean, look, it's easy to forget just how dire things were in the 1970s. Stagflation, gas lines, 22% interest rates. And yet, by the fourth year of Reagan's presidency, 1984, our economy went from absolute stagnation to growing 7.2% a year. Booming and expanding opportunity for millions working towards the American dream. And we went from our hostages languishing in Iran for 444 days, while the president wrung his hands unsure of what to do, to winning the Cold War without firing a shot and to the Berlin Wall falling to the ground. And so, Rick, when you ask about unifying the party, look, Reagan didn't go to Washington and sit down with a bunch of folks in Washington and make an argument in a closed room. It wouldn't have worked. What he did is he took the argument to the American people. He mobilized and energized the American people. The American people rose up, and today, every Republican is a Reagan Republican. The way we unify the Republican Party is by having the American people stand up and say, let's get back to the free market principles of the constitutional liberties that our great nation was founded on. That's what we need to stand for.
I think we're going to go rogue here and wander out. If anybody would like to ask the senator a question, raise your hands, and we'll try to get as many as we can before we run out of time. You just happen to be right here, and you look so nice.
But we didn't back then have 50% of the people getting free stuff. Mm-hmm. So now what?
It's a great question. Her question was, we didn't back then have 50% of the people getting free stuff. So now what? You know, the stated plan of the far left is to get as many Americans as possible dependent on government, trapped in dependency, so they will be a perpetual majority and vote them into office in perpetuity. I don't believe it's going to happen. If you think back to the last election, to the 2012 election, I think it came down to two words: 47%. When Mitt Romney was filmed saying, the 47% of Americans who are not paying income taxes, who are in some ways dependent on government, we don't have to worry about them. Now listen, I think Mitt Romney is a good man, a decent man. I think he ran a hard campaign. But I cannot think of a sentiment I disagree with more strongly than that sentiment. For a long time, what I've described my political philosophy as is opportunity conservatism, which is that every policy we think about, we talk about, should focus like a laser on opportunity, on easing the means of ascent up the economic ladder, on how it impacts the most vulnerable among us. What that comment didn't recognize, and sadly the entire narrative of the last election can be summed up in 47%. What it didn't recognize is that a great many of those 47% still desperately desire to stand on their own feet, to provide for their children, to achieve the American dream. You know, you asked why, and I would say, listen, all of us understand the world in a very significant way, framed by our own personal family experiences. In my life, my mom was born in Wilmington, Delaware. Irish and Italian. She was born in a working-class family. Her mother was the second youngest of 17 kids. My father was born in Cuba, grew up in Cuba, fought in the Cuban Revolution. As a teenager, when he was 14 years old, he began fighting in the Cuban Revolution. And he ended up being thrown in prison and tortured. He was beaten almost to death in Cuba, and he fled the Batista regime in 1957. He came to Texas. He was 18. He couldn't speak English. He had $100 sewn into his underwear. I don't actually advise carrying money in your underwear. And he got a job washing dishes. He made 50 cents an hour. And he paid his way through college. He went on to start a small business to work towards the American dream. Now, I try to think through the challenges we're facing every day from the perspective of my dad 57 years ago when he was washing dishes. And the reason I don't think the Democrats have succeeded in making Americans dependent is because, look, my father's been my hero my whole life. But what I find most extraordinary about him is how commonplace his story is. Every one of us, we could stand up here one at a time, and every single person here could tell a story just like that, whether it's us or our parents or our great-great-great-grandparents. We are the children of those who risked everything for freedom. And I think the fundamental DNA of Americans is to value liberty and opportunity above all else. It is the consequence of our being an immigrant nation. And it is because of that that I believe that the vast majority of Americans want nothing more than the dignity of work to provide for their kids and to have a chance to give them a better life. That's that aspiration, that hope, that's how we turn the country around.
President Cruz, I've got a couple things that will help. Yeah, that will help you become president of the United States. Number one, it's the economy that everybody knows. I mean, they don't know all this other stuff. You know, you get these other people. Tell them you're going to open up the pipeline and there's lots of money. Okay, and have a strong military. Remember that guy Putin over in Russia? Yeah, that's another one. Another one, defend the borders. And I mean, I know Ron, my husband Ron, can give you lots more. So you can just be optimistic like Reagan. Just tell him, hey, we're going to do this for you. Amen.
Thank you.
I absolutely, completely agree. Well, and let me note, let me use that as an example. Listen, I think we should have three central messages. Number one, stand for liberty. Stand for defending our constitutional liberties, every one of the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, all of the rights we're seeing violated right now by the government. Number two, stand against the lawlessness of this administration. No president has the authority to pick and choose which laws to follow. And then stand for economic growth and opportunity. My top priority in office from the day I've been elected is to restore jobs and economic growth. And the reason is simple, because that's the top priority of 26 million Texans. It's the top priority of people all over this country. You want to know why people are frustrated with Washington? The year and a half I've been in the Senate, we haven't spent barely a minute even talking about jobs and economic growth. We spent 6 weeks talking about the president's agenda to take away our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And not a minute talking about fundamental tax reform or regulatory reform or helping reduce the burdens on small businesses, which create 2/3 of the new jobs in our economy. And the most important reason economic growth matters is that it's foundational to opportunity. I think every Republican ought to have 2 words tattooed on their hand: growth and opportunity. Heck, I'm so inspired, I might get an eagle tattooed on my chest.
The senator's actually going to catch a plane here shortly, so we're going to get close to a wrap. My notes are obscured by a keyboard that appeared on here, so I'm going to once again wing it in the roundup here. I've got 2 things I want to congratulate you on. One that you're directly responsible for, and the other that you might be indirectly responsible for, at least happy about. Kathleen Sebelius has resigned, or is resigning. We can just throw a party now. It remains to be seen who comes or what comes in after that. And then the other thing is, what I think is a resounding victory for bipartisan support of a resolution that you put forth from the Senate, a resolution to ban a terrorist, in essence, who was put up by the Iran. Not only were you able to find somebody in Congress to sponsor it and get it through, but you worked with, of all people, Chuck Schumer to get it done. So that's very Reagan-esque, if you don't mind me saying so. Do you feel like commenting on that? And I want to thank you so much before we wrap on behalf of everybody in this room and every American. You are a shining light for us right now in America. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Those are two very important topics, so let me address them both, and that's a good way to wrap up. Let me start with the second one. So, as you all know, 2 weeks ago, the nation of Iran named Hamid Abu-Dhabi to be their ambassador to the United Nations. Now, Abu-Dhabi participated in holding 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. Now, for Iran to name as their ambassador someone who participated in holding and our people hostage was designed to be a slap in the face. It was designed to be a contemptuous insult, and it reveals the rabid anti-Americanism of the Iranian regime. It also reveals, sadly, the naivete of the administration that believes they're negotiating in good faith. So last week, I introduced legislation in the Senate to bar the admission of this known terrorist into the United States. On Tuesday of this week, the United States Senate passed that legislation unanimously. As Rick mentioned, I worked closely with Senator Chuck Schumer, Senator Pat Leahy, Senator Bob Menendez, all the usual suspects. In fact, I told Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor on Tuesday, I said, Chuck, I just got off CNN singing your praises. And he said, oh, goodness, would you please stop those nasty attacks? I got to run in New York. You're killing me. And then Senator Schumer went to the Senate floor and gave a speech praising the legislation that we had just passed. Yesterday afternoon, the House of Representatives passed the legislation unanimously. So the United States Congress was able to come together in a bipartisan manner, vote 535-0. We sent the bill to President Obama for signature, and today the White House announced we will deny a visa and bar this terrorist from entering the United States. Yesterday, the White House also announced Kathleen Sebelius was resigning. You know, it's interesting. I think that is yet another acknowledgement of the absolute disaster that has been Obamacare. I'm convinced the reason she resigned is that Senate Democrats are scared out of their minds. They are running for the hills. They are underwater in their races all over the country. And the number one reason is Obamacare. You know, Obamacare is the most disastrous piece of legislation in modern history. Four years ago, when Obamacare was being debated, reasonable minds perhaps could have differed on whether it might have worked. Today, looking at the train wreck, which is how its lead Senate author, Democrat Max Baucus, describes it, today, looking at the millions of Americans who have lost their jobs, who have been forced into part-time work, who have lost their health insurance, who have lost their doctor, who are seeing skyrocketing premiums, In my view today, it is the essence of pragmatism to acknowledge this thing isn't working, we got to start over. I often say the late night comics are a very good barometer for where the American people are. Last fall, Jay Leno said, So, President Obama called me. He said, Jay, if you like your job, you can keep it. A couple weeks later, Jay went back to the same theme. He said, So, holidays are coming up. Thanksgiving. You know, the first Thanksgiving, the Pilgrims said to the Indians, if you like your land, you can keep it. And let me tell you something, I am convinced, because of the millions of Americans who rose up last summer and last fall and said, this is a train wreck, this is a disaster, this is imperiling our health care, this is imperiling our jobs, this is imperiling our religious liberty. Because of the millions of people who have risen up and made clear what a disaster this is, I am convinced because of each of you, we are laying the predicate and we are going to repeal every single word of Obamacare. It won't come from Washington. It will come from the American people. That's the impact each and every one of you has. And I'll just wrap up with the same encouragement that I gave a few minutes ago, which is the impact you have. The impact each of you has with your friends, with your family, with your neighbors, when you pick up the phone, when you speak out, when you say, let's get back. We can do it. We can get back to the principles this country was founded on. That's how a tidal wave is started. That's what you're doing. And together, we're going to bring back Morning in America. Together, we're going to restore that shining city on a hill that is the United States of America. Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.